Hi everyone, this is Tanya from Flying Dog Studio. Thanks so much for joining me as I am working on part 2 of my experiment with the Derwent Graphitint Paint Pans. I will be linking down below the video where I created this color chart. It comes in handy for me as I pick out colors for this piece, so I'll link that down below for you. I decided instead of using my ceramic paint palette that I would just use the palette in the lid of the paint pan. So that's what we're going to use for this piece. And according to my chart, I'm going to need autumn brown and meadow to get the proper color for the face of this building. Another reason that I'm using the palette instead of layering straight over onto the building is that I've learned if I paint straight from the pan over to the building, that I can get more color than what I actually need, because these colors do get soft and you can accidentally dig down into them and then you have a glob of paint. So I'm going to put it over here to the side, and I decided to pre-mix these two and layer them on top. So I'm still technically layering, but I'm not going to layer like the meadow and then put the autumn brown on top. Instead, I'm just going to pre-mix them and add them to the building. It allows me to get it the exact color I need without having to go back and forth on things with different layers. So just going to save some time and pre-mix it over here. And while I am putting that on the building, I did want to mention to you, in the last video I talked about adding the line drawing onto my blog so that you could trace it, or you could download it, or however you wanted to use it so you could follow along. I have done that. You will notice that the lines are thicker than what they are on here and much straighter, and that's because I took my actual drawing and put it into my digital art program. I use Procreate, and I traced over everything and made it nice and crisp and made the lines darker so that you could see it through the paper. I have all the paper specs and everything you need written right down on the blog, and I'll put that link below so that you can follow along. I also have the drawing with a grid on top. If you like drawing it free-handed, you're welcome to do that. So do it however you want to do it. I did mine as a loose drawing. If you want to be more precise, the lines are drawn precisely, so that will help you out if you want to do that. If you want to do a loose drawing, I say go for it, but that will be down below. Something I found really interesting working with these colors is, and I'm gonna zoom in here so that you can see it. When you're mixing the colors on the palette, the grains kind of separate, the colors separate from each other. So if you're going to be mixing it to the side, be certain to give it a swirl as you go in and come back to the paper. Give it a swirl each time so that you don't have grains. Just, you want it consistent. You want it consistent. Now you will see in part, I think it's in part 3. Unfortunately, I did this in 3 parts because, as we've said, I'm painfully slow and I didn't want you to suffer through 35 minutes of video, so I put it in some bite-sized pieces to make it a little easier to digest. But I do let this paint dry. Purposefully, I let it dry because as it dries, it becomes a little more concentrated, and when it dries, those pigments stay separated. And I come in and reactivate it with water, but I don't put as much water in, and I don't mix it every time. And the reason for that is to have the pigment separated and to give a little bit of visual interest to it, because this is an older sort of rundown building and I didn't want a solid color through everything, and that just worked really well for this. So that's another way you can use these colors. If you look at it and you think, oh no, they're separating, this is terrible, maybe I shouldn't pre-mix them, it depends on how you need to use them. So for me, that worked out extremely well. And at this point, I think you can tell how that underpainting has helped us out to define the depth in the building and the shapes and the shading, all of that working together. I do like to do underpaintings, and usually they're black and white. This happened to be dark indigo and white, but I do that whether I'm working in digital art or in traditional art. I always like to do an underpainting. It just helps you to sort of plan your piece out, and it helps the colors to lay down just a little bit better. might think, well, I'm working harder because I'm doing it twice. Really, you're not. It's a lot easier if you do an underpainting to get all the colors right on top. And the shades that I've put down are not going to be our shades. I'm going to put some color on top, because shade is not just black or brown or gray. Shade has some color to it. So I have that dark underneath, and that's going to help put a value to the actual shaded color. So it'll make more sense once we get to that part, and we'll talk about it more in just a bit. While I'm using the palette for most of the painting on this piece, these little flower pots in the windows were very bright, so I decided just to be extremely careful and risk it and paint straight from the paint pan. Now, I think I mentioned in the first video, I'm not a water brush user, so this is all practice for me, and you do have to be careful how much water you're squeezing out. And as you can see, I hold it on that little blue area. This is the paintbrush. If you watched the Derwent ink tints when I was experimenting with that, this is the brush that came with those. And I really like this brush better than the one that's with this set, so that's why I'm using it. But you can see I'm holding on to that blue area. Unfortunately, I like to hold my brush up a little bit higher. I don't like to hold it down at the bottom like a pencil or a pen. I like to hold it up higher, and unfortunately that blue area is where you press to get the water come out, and I would accidentally, it's very sensitive, so I would accidentally hit that and the water would come out. So as you can see, I'm switching over here, and I'm going to put some in the paint pan so that I can go back and forth, because the shadows on the building actually have more of the autumn brown in them than they do with the meadow that I added in earlier. So you'll see me come back over the building. So again, we're layering colors. Now, time has passed just a little bit on this since I painted, and I am using that 100% cotton paper, so it dries, and it's cold press, so it dries fairly quickly. And it seems to me, I mean, it's just my personal opinion, that these Graphitint dry a little faster than watercolor. So that helped out a lot in working on this piece. I think we have enough of the shadows painted over right now with that autumn brown that you can see how the shadows no longer look like the dark indigo. Instead, they have a completely different shade to them. So this is why I put that autumn brown, or I put the indigo blue, the dark indigo down first. I'll say it right in a minute, the dark indigo down first, because it really helps this autumn brown to create the depth and the shadows that we need. And you can see as we run that autumn brown on top of the paint that we put down for the face of the building, it's a completely different color. So really loved layering these colors. It's really good. Actually, I hate to say it, but I think I like this better than my watercolors. So I know it's not watercolor, but I think I'm liking it a little bit better than my watercolors. This is what I was talking about. I thought it was in part 3, and it may be in part 3 as well, but it is definitely in part 2. If you'll notice, this is the color I used originally to paint the face of the building, and it is super saturated, and there are different shades going through it. Some is a little darker, some is a little lighter, but as you can see, it has dried a little bit in the pan. I did not add more water to it, only have a little bit on my brush, and now I'm coming back in and look at the color that it's putting down. Absolutely fabulous. One thing I do have to mention in this video, and I apologize for it, I live in the South and the weather here is unpredictable. For instance, on Christmas it was around 60 degrees. Yesterday it was 60 degrees, and by this weekend we may get snow. So when I was filming these, I filmed it over a couple of days because I have things going on. So I can't sit down at one time and do everything all at once. And unfortunately, we'll have days that are super cloudy. We'll have days that are sunny. So when I'm painting on this particular day, the sun is perfect coming in. I can use that natural light. And you'll see that things look a little bit darker maybe in a few minutes, and that's because some clouds move through. So I apologize for that, but hopefully at the end I have a good picture of it and you can actually see the color, and that will be in part 3, so be sure and catch part 3. Something else I hope you notice on this is that I am using an extremely limited palette at this point, and I'm still getting a tremendous amount of value, tremendous amount of color shades here that it surprised me how much I could actually get from this. So they, as I said, they layer really well, and I'm trying to keep a limited palette. And when you come back in part 3, you're going to see some blues and some greens added in. We need those for the greenery and for some of the highlights and stuff, but in this particular video we're keeping it very limited. As we are coming to the end here, I am simply going back and adding some more of those colors to add some more drama and some more depth to all of the shading on the building. So I want to remind you to check out the description, because I will have those links there for my blog, and the blog is JSAFlowerPower.blogspot.com. It won't say Flying Dog Studio. JSA Flower Power was our blog for my studio before I retired. That's where I put stuff on for the kids. They would come and get assignments and learn more about art, and then we just turned it into something strictly for the YouTube channel. So kept the same name, JSA Flower Power. Thank you so much for watching. If you have any suggestions or comments or questions, put those down below. If there's something else you want me to try with this, let me know. And I appreciate your being here. So thanks so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.